without a variance?
We got public school, church, mobile home and mobile home park, temporary real estate office.
Can it just be included in that part of
Mr. Wagner?
If it's included in the allowed uses, you can have a bed and breakfast in any U1 district on every block. By putting it in the B part under special exception, there has to be a public hearing on it, which would give the public's opinion or neighbors' opinions on it, and allow them to voice those opinions before that decision's made.
I think it gives it a little bit more oversight if it's put in the,
If it's put in the special
Where it
exception,
has
yeah,
to be by
there's more
variance.
oversight from, actually, the oversight comes from the Board of Zoning Appeals because it requires a public hearing.
The reason I ask is because, like I say, it is less obtrusive than all the things that are allowed without any oversight.
I don't know if I would agree. Any comments, questions from city council members?
So what's the neighborhood reaction so far? I mean, do we not need, is that premature?
We did, Mrs. Cease did apply for a variance to do this. We're unable to grant a variance to a use that's not listed in the table of uses for a zoning district. So Mrs. Cease was refunded her money on that, and that's now why she's here. There was some opposition at that variance hearing, one pointing out that we could not allow or give a variance for a use that's not allowed. And another one was that there's other multifamily housing up in that area that they wonder how it come about, which the zoning ordinance says that that's a use by special exception. I have found no records of any special exceptions ever being granted up in that area, so when that come about, was it possibly grandfathered, or was it a more recent thing where it wasn't grandfathered and it just happened?
I think if the city council were to amend section B and put a bed and breakfast as one of the uses permitted by variance, that they, once we went through the amending procedure and had 3 readings and amended the ordinance, the Board of Zoning Appeals at this point would still have to have that hearing whether to determine whether to have a variance issued there or not. So that same notice that was given out before would be given out again, and the neighbors would have an opportunity to voice their opposition or support for this bed and breakfast at that time if it were amended by the city council.
What would be your expected occupancy, like what, how many rooms are available that you, I mean, I understand there's just
four
one
guest,
driveway,
there's 4 guest rooms.
4 guest rooms.
There's also room to park about 5 cars, actually more than 5, off the street, so that's not an issue.
So in the driveway?
There's 2 big garages, plus it's not driveway, it's cement ramp. So there's room to park lots of cars. And garages and off the street, so probably none of my guests would ever park on the street.
And in this zoning ordinance, it has specifications for different types of structure or uses, how many off-street spaces they would need. So for multifamily dwellings, it says they need to have 1.5 spaces for each dwelling unit. So if there was 2 units, they'd have to have 3 spaces. For say like hospitals and nursing homes, they would have 1 space per 3 beds, and as well as 1 space per 2 employees. So I think in amending this zoning ordinance, we could make specifications for how many off-street parking spaces would be needed for bed and breakfast.
I think this is the type of thing we need in Delphi right now. people come in and they don't have any place to stay. I've stayed in a lot of bed and breakfasts all over the United States, and the majority of them are in residential areas. And I've not seen any problem. Some areas have many of them. You know, we're hurting right now to have places for people to stay. There've been several conferences here, there were no rooms. Yeah, I think it's something we need to support. It's something we really need.
Mr. Wagner, are there any provisions, are there any zones which allow bed and breakfast in the Delphi zoning code? It's been a while since I've read through the entire document, but.
It would have to, in my interpretation of the ordinance, it would have to go to one of the business districts where lodging rooms are permitted.
But really, nothing in this spells out. Bed
Nothing
and
spelled
breakfast.
out as a bed and breakfast, no. Another thing too, there was, during the flooding and stuff this last summer down along the south and the eastern seacoast and stuff, a lot of those individuals that had to evacuate their homes and stuff did stay in bed and breakfasts up to where they were outside of the flooding zones and stuff. A lot of those bed and breakfasts were referred to as Airbnbs, which post typically no or very little signage identifying the property and things, and everything's done online. And I know Mrs. Cease is somewhat familiar with that because she's brought that to my attention as well. And then through other conferences and stuff is where I got the information that a lot of those folks that were evacuated out of the Carolinas and stuff were actually put up in Airbnbs.
You know, are other municipalities making provisions for like Airbnb, or is it typically just being kind of flying under the radar, going into one zone?
I believe a lot of them are starting to add that with the updated technology and everything that we're getting into in today's world.
What's the current, bed and breakfast houses and?
That's what I was gonna ask. The current one in the corner of front and,
Those are all zoned as businesses.
Which, if it were to be zoned as business, that is kind of the definition of spot zoning, is within a
Yeah.
U1 district. It would be the only one of its kind, and I think it would set a bad precedent for zoning across the city to have a business especially located in a residential district. Any more questions, comments from the council?
I do have a comment.
Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Ross.
The word variance and special exceptions have been thrown around a lot. In my understanding, a variance is a measurement exception, a meets and bound thing, like how tall your building is, how far your setback has to be. A special exception is a use rule. The real problem with this is, in the present Delphi zoning ordinance, there is no bed and breakfast allowance. I talked to the mayor a little bit. The idea that it would be a special exception, I certainly would agree is a good idea, but there needs to be a definition of what a bed and breakfast is, and then what rules you want to have one. The problem here is most commercial uses are not allowed in residential areas. This is a commercial use that's presently not allowed. It might be a good idea to allow it, but then the question is, I think the mayor was saying, is what are you going to allow, and how are you going to define the allowance? And it shouldn't just be that you pick one person and say that's okay or not okay. The government shouldn't be picking who the winners are. If you can have bed and breakfast, you should be able to have them. If you can't have them, you shouldn't be able to have them. But if you're going to have one, you should have to follow whatever rules there are to qualify for that use. At least that would be my suggestion. But I would also suggest, again, to think about this, variances are about measurements. Special exceptions are about uses, and it gets kind of confusing when we talk about the two things interchangeably.
And that's, I apologize, because I'm the one that's been using them interchangeably, because special exception is hard to say repeatedly, but
You don't have to apologize to me, Mr.
it
Mayor.
is all right. I understand where you're coming from. So as a special exception, I guess, are there any other comments from the council? If you would wish to proceed, I think Prosecutor Ives is right in defining bed and breakfast, looking to what other cities and towns and counties have for what rules are required in terms of off-street parking, any other rules that are required that our ordinance sets out, so that's at least similar in nature to our ordinance. But that's how the council wishes to proceed.
I definitely wish we would do that.
When this property was purchased, were you not aware that there could be some issues?
Oh, yes. I know this is how it was
Any other comments or discussion from the council, yes, sir?
Yeah, how many, you say you have 4 rooms for rent,
correct.
correct? You have 1 bathroom in the house? Or do you have 2, do you have a separate bathroom that is used by the, say, your
The
tenants
house
that
now
will be
has
there?
2.5 bathrooms,
Uh-huh.
and I'm gonna add 3 more half bathrooms.
When you say half, that means a sink and stool, or a sink and stool and shower or
You know, single.
sink and stool? Gordon?
Well, that's part of the idea and charm of a bed and breakfast is to have it in a historic home, which was not built and constructed with a bathroom in every room. That's part of being historic, but that's where the bed and breakfast gets its charm and makes it different than a motel or hotel.
Maybe any other discussion from the council? Would somebody of you like to put it, get the feeling that the council would wish to proceed in finding, at least getting some sample definitions of bed and breakfast, at least seeing what other cities and towns have on the books for this sort of thing, presented with a draft ordinance at the December meeting. Would a councilor please put that into the form of a motion? Or just state that they move what I just said?
I make a motion that we investigate the description of, and the requirements of a bed and breakfast, and have that information at the December meeting to discuss.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to investigate the description and definition of a bed and breakfast, and have that information available to discuss at the December meeting.
There's no ordinance, waiting on the ordinance or going in.
Would we like to have a draft ordinance?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind going ahead that too.
Would you second still stand with that? Having a draft ordinance? Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Cease. Thank you, Prosecutor Hodges. Mr. Wagner. All right. That's fine with my agenda. We also have Mr. Maddox. I can skip around enough for you guys today. For community center update, we have Mr. Adams, Councilman Shockley, and Seward are on the committee for the senior/community center, whatever we end up calling it. They've contacted Mr. Maddox, and if I could get, I guess, from the councilors and Director Adams, an update of where the committee is and what Mr. Maddox has for us today.
Yeah. We have diagrams. Mr. Maddox, please come forward. We have diagrams of, so far, of blueprint, rather, of the building, what we'd like to see in the building, and how we would like to lay it into the land that hopefully we know that the city already owns. It would be called the Senior Community Center or the Community Senior Center, whichever way you want to put it. But it would be laid out, and if those of you who are interested after the meeting can come up, we'll leave these layouts so you can see what we have. I was talking to Mr. Maddox and also talked to Jake and Dale about what we want to do and how we want to do it. and everything. Mr. Maddox laid out the building towards the railroad track. And when in our conversations, he said, I told him I thought that with the street being between the railroad track and the building, we should move the building to the backside of the lot so that when the railroads come through, they're not jarring the ground around the building. Because you know as well as I do, when you start digging things and you pack things down, it takes time for a good-sized building to settle. Just like concrete, can't keep it from cracking, but you can keep it from spreading apart. But we've talked, and I'm gonna be honest with you, we've contacted Mr. Maddox to bring us up a set of blueprints. The committee approved a $3,000 for the blueprint and stuff in our last meeting. I believe, Adam, don't we have a meeting on the 27th of this month?
That's correct. So we'll reconvene on the 27th. We've agreed to organizationally structure this to where Senior Family Services will be giving their contributions to the city of Delphi and an account to be used for this building. So basically, at this point, we are going to facilitate the fundraising for a community center and Senior Family Services. So, yeah, so essentially, go ahead, Mayor.
Mr. Maddox?
If I can interject, what date's your next meeting? December 5th?
Next meeting?
It's a Sunday, 27th is Sunday.
I got December 1st at 5:30.
And that'll be here?
Correct.
All right. Sorry, Mr. Maddox, please.
Well, what Mike has expressed is kind of what the site plan I put together was showing. I initially located the building just off of Columbia Street because the site tends to slope towards the north just a bit. So I wanted the building on the high ground, preferably. But with the setbacks we have to do, since it's a corner lot, so on, the site really became very restrictive and we were not technically able to get the parking on the site without infringing upon the alley to the north. So there are some advantages in flipping it and putting the building up against the alley. Might tend to lead to some more site development costs, but
Yeah, so we were going to address some of these, we were going to address these at our public meeting on December 1st at 5:30. It is a committee meeting, but it's open to the public.
Yeah.
So we just want to kind of give an outline of where we're at and to encourage the public to attend the meeting and inject any input that they feel, and we will have those discussions on the December 1st meeting.
Do you have any questions from the council for Mr. Maddox concerning the community center? Do you have any questions from the public for Mr. Maddox concerning the community center?
So what we're referring to is the old Loy roofing property, right? That's-
Whiteman
Whiteman
elevator.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're moving it to the south then?
Yeah. What would we move
no,
it on?
we need moving it towards the north, which addresses another concern I've had. Obviously, there was structures on this property at some point, and quite honestly, I don't know how the debris was disposed of, whether it's all buried on the site or whatever. I know I was involved in a project a couple of years ago where there was an accident on the side of an old elevator. when we started doing the excavations for the new building, we found out that there were big chunks of concrete buried down in there with massive voids. So we spent an additional $20,000 remediating the site so we could continue with our project. So, I certainly like to get a better understanding what structures were there and maybe how they were disposed of.
We should have records because that was previously remediated, I believe. Is that the parcel?
We didn't do the Whiteman, we did,
Lawyer, or whatever.
Lawyer.
I don't know where to
You
go.
know what I mean. We didn't do Whiteman's.
Okay.
How's that? We did not do Whiteman's. We did, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong,
The
we
old Lloyd
did
Quinn
the old
property.
Lloyd Quinn property.
Correct.
Everything has been done and settled. There's a whole box settlement on that particular project. But
Was that on the same block?
Correct.
that's on the same block, but it had nothing to do with Whiteman Elevator.
Okay, well, what documents I've seen thus far, the actual elevator building was basically out in the middle of Columbia Street,
Correct.
Yes.
so.
So I just, so at this point, what you're saying is there's a possibility that we could run into obstructions or what, I mean, the high likelihood of a setback, and I don't mean setback, but setback in the project on the property, I guess is the next question.
Well, we'll certainly look at whatever records the city has on the property.
Does the city have anything that represents what was there previously or how it was destroyed?
Oh, that's what I thought you said.
You're gonna do the north side of the same parcel.
I believe that was Lloyd Quinn building, Whiteman's bought it, the building that was on it actually burnt, I'm gonna say probably in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, when that building burnt, when Lloyd Quinn had it, and then Whiteman's had purchased that for some outdoor storage and things, feed tanks and things like that.
That's not my recollection, but because the city purchased the Whiteman elevator property, it was somewhat controversial because cities supposedly were not supposed to purchase property. And then it was sometime later that the Lloyd property, I thought, became available. I mean,
That's your sticking.
I don't know. Maybe you know more history than I do, so.
I would just,
I'm just confused about where it actually sits.
right, and I'm just concerned with moving a project forward that eventually could be a financial liability to the city. And that's certainly not what we want to do if we go forward with this project and realize that there is concrete voids and now we've got way more in it than we potentially could have had just by putting a building on a site. So,
I don't think concrete voids is going to be, I mean, I guess nobody knows what's down there.
right.
But I would be surprised if that were the case.
I think we can discuss the,
The only thing that was left, that's where we used to store the salt, and that was all Whiteman's property. The only thing left at that particular time when we took it over, Whiteman had already tore his elevator down, they removed all that. That was primarily in the middle of Columbia Street, and the scale house sat on the north side of the current curb on Columbia Street. So most of that's gonna be on that side of Columbia Street, if there's anything. We tore the old slab and foundation out where the salt used to sit. We did that in-house. You must forgive me because that was quite some time ago, but I'm quite certain we built all that footing out. Don't quote me as 100%, but we tore most of that out, put the curb on the backside, put the road in, graded everything out, and finished it off to what you see today.
yeah,
So
so,
I don't think the danger of voids below the surface.
Other than the foundation that was originally there, I don't remember anything else in my time sitting out in the rest of that yard. I don't recall.
that's reassuring. So, I mean, I think as a committee, we come back together and figure out next steps and planning phase, so that's great information, so thank you. Maddox, do we have anything else? Thank you very much. Thank you, councilors. Director Adams? Thank you.
Jerk.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we'll move next. Is there anybody else from the public here for matters? All right. Now, if it suffices, we'll just go down the agenda from here on out. All right. So the first item on the agenda is unfinished business, discussion of building code, chapter 150, building regulations. At the last meeting, we discussed amendments that could be made to the current ordinance. Give me. So I've pulled up 10 different municipalities' building code ordinance from across the state of Indiana, highlighted, well, their entire codes, well, not their entire, the codes that pertain to things that we have in our code, and identified some of the items that we addressed. Give me just a second. So when I went through my analysis, I found 4 different items which I think could bring a lot of discussion before the council. The first is the scope as defined in our ordinance. Our ordinance defines the scope. It says the provisions of this code apply to the construction, alteration, repair, use, occupancy, in addition to all buildings and structures other than industrialized building systems or mobile structures certified under Indiana Code 2215-4 in the city. After analyzing some of the other cities' ordinances, there are some cities which have additional language which state fences do not fall within the scope of this chapter, and there is a definition of repair, which let's see, Rochester says that repair shall not include the replacement of roofing material or windows, which does not require the alteration or replacement of structural supports in either the roof or walls of the building. That was the most restrictive definition I could find after reviewing 10 other municipalities' ordinances. I don't know if that's something the city council would like to consider.
Well, I definitely think repair should not include windows or roof. They're not structural.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a question for Doug. Yes, sir. Doug, when you do something to your home, the only, from my understanding in getting permits before you were here, the only time that you really had to have a permit was when you changed the outside structure of the house. If you weren't going to, if you were gonna put windows in the same place that you took them out, and basically just replace new windows, your old windows with new ones, you didn't have to have a permit to do that.
That's correct, and that's not required by the building code.
Right. Now, with this building code that we are discussing, if I was to take and change, say, take the insulation off or the plasterboard off the wall and decide to redo that, would I have to have a permit to do that?
By building code, yes, you would if you opened up. When I was at White County, I limited that to 100 square feet of room area or larger.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you were moving fixtures, plumbing fixtures, if you're moving them to a different location, because that would be an extension of a drain or sanitary sewer, that leads to other health issues if they aren't done properly.
Right, right.
And one of the reasons that's in the building code is because years ago, fire stopping wasn't required in residential structures. Today it is.
Right, fire block,
The fire block,
Yeah.
yes, that keeps,
right,
that keeps
right.
home from becoming engulfed in a lot shorter period of time, allowing the residents to get out
Right.
safely.
In case some of you don't know what fire block are, Doug knows, there's a block that goes 4 foot up round on your wall.
Well, the
With
fire
the
block,
break-
that isn't necessarily required,
True,
but fire stopping of all plate penetrations are where they penetrate the floor or the ceiling line. That is done with an intumescent caulk right now. When that's exposed to heat, it swells, restricts that opening to where that can't pass through, because what you do in essence is create a chimney,
mm-hmm,
so that gas and stuff, now you got a fire burning inside the wall.
right,
Old, early 1900s homes are notorious for that because they were done in a balloon frame manner. They did not have any of this fire blocking in between the floors or anything else, so fire started in the basement, it was coming out the roof 5 minutes later. Fire department would come, put out the fire, put their hoses back on the truck, get ready to pull away, and the house was back in flames. Because the fire actually started in the basement, they didn't realize that, they hadn't been in the house yet.
I just wondered about that.
So although roofs and window replacement wouldn't be required, would require a permit,
Roofs, siding, changing fixtures out, changing the natural gas water heater, taking 40,000 BTU unit out, putting a new one in, does not require a permit.
and where do we find that it does not require a permit? Is that within the articles of the Indiana Administrative Code?
That
Or
is within the building code itself.
within the City of Delphi ordinance?
The City of Delphi ordinance refers you to the building code as adopted by the state of Indiana.
Right.
You go back to those code books, it specifically states replacements of furnace, water heater, fixtures without any change in size or configuration. Now, if you take a gas furnace out and put an electric furnace in, yes, it requires a permit because you're changing the wiring, you're removing a gas line, or if you're going from electric to gas, you're adding a gas line. You need to look at those gas lines, make sure they're the appropriate size to where you don't create a problem.
So that would fall in that section that we don't have here because that's under the Indiana Administrative Code, Title 675. I assume that'd be Article 13, Building Codes.
Yes. Within that, there are all the various code sections, the,
Right, there's the Fire and Building Safety Standards, Indiana Building Code, Indiana Building Code Standards, Indiana Handicap Accessibility Code, just under that article. And that would be found there.
yes.
So currently, the Indiana code only refers